So I saw a big data book in one of the Turkish clients we had yesterday, and I wrote a few notes from one of these snippets in the front of the book. And this was a snippet from one of the top executives from Google. And Google most definitely know about big data. They thrive like Amazon on big data. And he said from the beginning of civilization, I think civilization was pretty much started in Turkey and continues in Turkey, I'm pleased to add. I'm very honoured to be here. Humans generated about 5 exabytes of data between the beginning of humankind to around 2013. Just 5 exabytes of data. Now the same volume of data is created within 2 days. That genuinely is big data, and it's ever increasing. So I'm going to do a quick exam, because I know many of you are still expert students. So some of the features of big data are summarized quite simply. 3 V's, 1 C. So quick examination, what does the first V in big data stand for? Velocity, very good. Which equals speed, which I'll come back to.
Volume.
Volume, which equals size or big, correct? The other V? Variety. Spot on, 10 points for that one. It's very mixed, increasingly mixed. And the last one, what does the C stand for? 10 points. Complexity. It's increasingly complex because of the velocity, the volume, and the variety. So those are really the features that we all know comprise big data. And they're really creating this tipping point that we're now seeing, where data is now created increasingly by devices. You've all got your mobile phones, your laptops, your iPads, etc. And increasingly data isn't just human generated, it's generated by devices, by machines. Increasingly, everyone here will be using more and more technology to get better data insights, to be an insight-driven human being or an insight-driven company. So that's driving the growth of data. It's also driving the growth of artificial intelligence, machine learning, which are hot areas. And I won't cover those, I'm not an expert in those, but they are the dawn of a new era. Robotics, artificial intelligence, machine learning. And the most important thing is data can perish over time. So the most important data is live, it's living data, it's raw data. So the ability to access living, raw, consumable data is critical in today's society. So I'm going to touch on 3, and there'll probably be more, but certainly in my IT career, 3 data eras. The first one, I'm using the right colour here, was the IBM one, and that was a hierarchical data era. Designed primarily by IBM for IBM machines. IBM was really a hardware company in its early days, it's transitioned and moved with time. But it created a hierarchical database for its IBM machines, its IBM mainframes, mid-range machines. And that's a long-lived data era, and it actually still exists. There are many loyal, hierarchical, mainframe IBM clients for good reason. But then a new era dawned when a new data type emerged. And that was a data type which was really rows and columns of data. And the company or the industry that was driving this new database requirement was the intelligence services. They needed to look at data in a very different, very real-time, a very row and column sort of way. So Larry Ellison spotted the opportunity, and lo and behold, Oracle was born. And not just Oracle in the relational era, Informix, Sybase, Ingress, but they all kind of merged or acquired or disappeared, and certainly Oracle remained the masters of relational big data to this day. So that era hasn't gone, still exists. Most obviously, Oracle has not disappeared. Excuse me one moment.
Pocket. Does that work? Testing, testing, 1, 2, 3. I can sing a song for you now if you like. The third era was really the sequel and NoSQL and enterprise NoSQL, and so it goes on, data, with companies like MongoDB and MarkLogic and many more besides. And they saw that data was changing. It was increasingly unstructured or semi-structured, and you had to compare the three data eras: hierarchical data, with Oracle relational data, with unstructured, semi-structured, the highest volume of data primarily coming from our devices. And you had to really analyze across all three realms of big data. So the new world of enterprise NoSQL was born not too long ago, a matter of years ago. So when it comes to big data, change is the only certainty. There will be new eras. They will live for a certain time side by side. But as the data structure changes, the way you house the data, the way you store the data, the way you actually enrich the data, analyze it, will require new tools. And I'll talk a bit about that. Also, it'll require a different way of provisioning that data. Hitherto, companies would build vast data centers, but data centers require a lot of IT personnel, a lot of air conditioning, a lot of water cooling, and companies should not be data centers. There are data center companies out there in this day and age that can reduce cost. In the world economic climate, it's all about reducing costs. So why should companies become software houses if they're a bank or an insurance company or a construction company? That's their forte. They should leave data center provisioning to other industry experts. And so we've witnessed the birth of cloud, and increasingly banks, insurance companies, all sorts of commercial industries in particular are now embracing the provision of data through cloud offerings, through hybrid cloud offerings, through private cloud offerings, private obviously for data security purposes. And so we've seen the huge growth with Amazon AWS, Microsoft Azure, Google, and so the list goes on. And many telecommunications companies, as we were talking earlier, looking to become in-country data center provisioners of big data. So let's talk a bit about how data is managed and what the fundamental problem in this day is. So the first big issue is time to insight. Every business wants to be an insight-driven business. What that means is they want to make better decisions increasingly faster and more accurately. But they're having a really difficult time doing that. The other area is around data value. And I mentioned earlier, the older the data is, it becomes perishable. It becomes less useful. So the world increasingly is focused on this raw data, the ability to get to that as quickly as possible. And whether it's a bank or whatever, time is money. You can't waste time trying to access and analyze your data. Now, I mentioned the word access. The biggest issue with big data is no longer the databases to house it. They exist. It's no longer the storage devices coming from EMC, etc. They exist. It's no longer the cloud provisioners. They've emerged. But it's really one of accessibility. So let's look at what the real need is. The L on the left stands for limited access or low accessibility. On the right, the desire by every individual, every company, every government agency to have higher availability, higher accessibility of their data. So that's the fundamental issue today with big data. It's all about accessibility. You've got all the various siloed databases, Hadoop clusters here, etc. But the fundamental issue is they are siloed. Trying to get a holistic view of that data is very, very hard. So in this domain, you've got all the devices available to you, the Hadoop clusters, the Oracle, the MarkLogic, the IBM databases, the EMC storage devices. But you're trying to move from limited and restricted access up to the super right quadrant, where really you have discoverable data, agile data. We were with one of your largest agencies here today, and we met the head of agility. So the data journey is one of driving agility, velocity, speed, time to insight. But most companies, and I think you'll recognize this problem, try and query and access their data in a legacy way. They throw people, they throw money at the problem instead of modernizing. And in the big data world, unless you digitize, you die. Unless you modernize, your competitors will leapfrog you. So that's a dangerous position to be in. And here's why. This is the traditional way that many companies still try and access, which is the fundamental problem, their data. So you've got the business analyst here. I know there are quite a few business analysts in the audience, desperate to query the unknown from their data sets. Because querying the known, you can do from gut instinct. If you've run a successful advertising campaign and you've gained new clients, you don't need to run a query. You know why you've gained those clients. So why query the known? The best value you get from raw data is where you query the unknown, the most complex, the most or near real-time data. So you've got a business analyst here with a brand new query from their complex data environment down here on the left. So they'll go to their friendly IT department, which could be small, it could be large. Let's say it's 3 people here, and say, can you code me a new query. We've run this advertising campaign, but instead of winning clients, we're losing them. And I have no idea why. And client retention is important to any business-to-business or business-to-consumer environment. So they need to create a new code. So what they have to do is do some coding to give them access to these disparate data silos so they get a holistic view of that client base. Why are they hemorrhaging clients after a very expensive campaign? That data, once accessed, then gets ingested, cleansed, put through ETL tools, of which there are many, and then put into a friendly front-end dashboard, a BI report, and it goes back to the business analyst who has been waiting very patiently for an answer. But this is really an information highway traffic jam. We drove here tonight at peak time, so instead of taking minutes, it took a long time. Luckily, we were still on time, but it took a long time. So the information highway, the data highway, is like blood in your body clogging. It's not getting through the veins sufficiently and efficiently. So something has to give. And the real problem here is you have a zoo of tools built by many point solution vendors at different times, not designed to be integrated with each other. So you're not creating a smooth flow of data. The data is zigzagging. And what that creates is a data traffic jam. The last thing you want to incur when you want to be an insight-driven business. Time is money. You need value from that data. So in this sort of environment, you're talking months or weeks to really get the business insight you need, by which time your competitors probably have launched a better campaign, a laser-focused campaign with the holistic data that it's taken them minutes to analyze in a much better way. So what is the better way? How do you reach data nirvana here? And there is a way. The way is to remove this zoo of tools, which is a legacy model. And as I said, unless you modernize, digitize, organizations will die. They have to change the way they access their big data. They leverage their big data investments. And these invariably are multi-million dollar investments, languishing in data lakes, languishing in data quagmires. So they need to break that data lake, break the quagmire, get easy access, fast access, and make rapid, highly qualified decisions. So the ideal way to change this is to really focus IT on where their specialization exists. And they really are specialized in two key areas when it relates to big data. One is accessibility, the biggest problem, and the other, very important to governments, banks, etc., is security. I apologize for my doctor's handwriting, by the way. I've got terrible handwriting, but hopefully you're getting there with me. So rather than have IT focus on all these point solutions, gluing them together, trying to integrate, trying to increase the velocity across that data highway, why not create a data super autobahn, a data super highway? Instead of a zoo of tools, you have a single one end-to-end data preparation platform. And that becomes the missing link in your big data stack. If you can remove this data traffic jam, leverage the data investment you've got, get discoverable insights in an agile way, you have reached big data nirvana. Not many organizations have got there yet. And there are a host of companies that now provide this new era of data preparation, data ingestion, from really cloud or data source right the way through to the analytical front end, whatever that may be. It could be Click, it could be Tableau, it could be any other sort of sexy front end, basically. So what you want to do is empower the business analysts here to do all the querying and get all the answers in an ad hoc way, whenever they want. They don't have to go to IT every time to code up new queries. Because these tools are so intuitive, they're kind of like Excel on steroids. They don't have to be experts in coding. They simply use this platform as this data superhighway, from infrastructure to front-end data insights. So it takes the ocean of data to a manageable scale. And that's what you have to do in the big data world. So what's driving this change, these data eras? Well, increasingly, it's one of regulation. And in a regulatory environment, whether that's telecommunications, healthcare, government, banking, one thing becomes king or queen, and that is data. Data becomes your second most valuable corporate asset, apart from us, the human beings. Humans are always, hopefully, the number one asset, but data is the number two most important corporate asset to become an insight-driven business. So it's all about the use case. If you're talking big data to companies, which we do every day, regardless of the industry they're in, they want to learn, how is this data superhighway being transitioned into a front-end use case? And invariably, these use cases are repeatable. How can you learn from these use cases? Is it one of customer insight, customer experience, know your customer? Is it one of regulatory compliance, reporting? It could be any of those. But the organizations in big data that are most successful sell the use case. You know, the infrastructure all exists. What the client wants to know is, how is it being used to transition themselves into an insight-driven business, a more profitable business, reducing cost, increasing performance, data nirvana. So in conclusion, I would say, prepare for the inevitable. There will always be a new dawn of data companies. There will always be a new dawn of analytical companies. There is now a solution to the problem of data accessibility. It's replacing the zoo of tools, finding the missing link in your big data stack. Digitize now, modernize now. Don't throw people, money at a big data problem. The tools exist to solve that problem. Any questions? Yes.
I don't understand why your business analytics person just access data by himself or herself and do the analysis by himself or herself. In this way, he or she doesn't have to wait for months or weeks. Maybe I'm asking a dumb question.
Right, no.
In the last semester or so, in big data course, we just connected Python with pgadmin and access to our data and run our analysis on different notebooks. So why don't those people don't do such things?
Well, they may do, but the fundamental issue is most data, if you're going to get a holistic view of, let's use a customer analogy, you might have 3 bank accounts with a bank. They will see you as 3 different customers. So what you need is to consolidate the data from their different data sources, consolidate that, blast it through a super data highway that does the ingestion, the cleansing, the ETL, and then surface it through a BI front end. So the back end exists, now the middle infrastructure exists, the data superhighway, but what it's actually enabling is, rather than this IT traffic jam here.
It's not just data analysis, but before you have these people, the IT people, has to handle the data in a way that should
In a better way. So if they have more time spent, because these poor people are overburdened because of the backlog, and the business is increasingly demanding, where's my data? I need to query it, I need it faster, help, 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 I need it yesterday. So there's this huge IT backlog here, and organizations, because of the economic climate, aren't increasing the number of IT personnel. Invariably, they're decreasing it. So what you have to do in that environment is focus IT on where they're absolute experts and where it's the biggest problem. How do you access data from these disparate silos? How do you apply security to that data, role-based, etc.? But then you empower the business analysts, because this is enterprise-grade platforms. They're designed to look like Excel on steroids. So a user doesn't need to be an IT expert to apply the ad hoc querying. So it's all about user empowerment, removing the IT backlog, the data traffic jam, and resolving or solving the biggest big data issue, access and security.
It's very user-friendly.
Very user-friendly, almost intuitively.
Is it also flexible? Is it customizable?
Yes. So through plugins here, you can build applets, and that's where the real future. Yeah, that's where I think the future is building these repeatable business solution use cases at the front end, where you derive the greatest value from your data. You have to access it quickly.
Is there such tool on the market other than your product?
Yeah, there are a host of tools. So you'll notice I haven't even mentioned my product because I'm not here to sell it. So take your choice, but the good thing is this issue has now been solved, the biggest issue.
But this is like teaching SQL to the manager.
Yeah.
The manager can do this. Like,
Sure.
I put access in my manager desk like 20 years ago, and this happened.
Yeah.
What is the difference now? But beyond, well, no, we don't have SQL, we have something else. But it's like training your manager to think like an IT guy? Or?
Yeah, well, the part of it's training, and as I mentioned, the look and feel of this is similar to Excel, so there's very little training required. But the real issue is the volumes of raw data that IT are now having to deal with are overburdening them. And that's slowing down the business insight, the business decision-making process at a time when organizations need to be nimble and fast in their decision-making.
But then I have a specific question, because
Yes.
when you do the database, you know that some queries are very easy to and very fast to answer, and some take months. If you
Yeah.
ask in the wrong order, it is 100 times or 1,000 times slower. So that is something that the IT people know well. You know your database, you know the index and what is the correct way to do the queries.
Yeah.
But how can you do that without?
In an unstructured way, because again, because the way in which this is created, you're empowering the business user. You're not requiring IT to recode, requery every single.
But then you have to teach the manager how to ask the correct question.
Yeah. Certainly, empowering the knowledge of using the tool is critical, but it's not difficult to impart that knowledge. So invariably, the business analysts are power analysts. They know how to analyze their data. So educating them is pretty simple. What isn't simple is the access and the security. Good question. Any other questions?
Does it work as well with unstructured data?
Yes. So what you're seeing is, because the world is moving on into cloud provisioning and into unstructured and semi-structured data. You have to have a neutral platform, a Swiss style of platform that doesn't care where the data source is or what type it is, whether it's structured, semi-structured, unstructured. It can filter that, it can ingest it, it can prepare it, and it can pass it through to the front-end applets that I referred to. Yeah, so we've got a very big credit card company, for example. I can't name who they are, but they serve some of the richest people in the United States, so some seriously rich multi-billionaires. And their business analysts knew how the billionaires spend their money. You know, they spend it on very big houses, beautiful holidays, fast cars, yachts. So they didn't need to query the known. What they wanted to do is have a competitive edge, competitive advantage, and query the unknown. And it was taking them months to do laser-targeted marketing for these super rich individuals using the traditional way. So using this new modernized methodology, they were able to do it in a matter of days. And they determined that the super rich Americans have changed their lifestyles. They've got so much money these days. There's one thing they want to do, and that's live longer. And if they didn't change their lifestyles, their dietary habits, they would die, and they wouldn't have a chance to spend all that lovely money. So they determined through using this analytics methodology that the super rich were spending their money daily on getting fit, on lifestyle dietary measures, on eating mainly grain food, porridge, etc., cereal, instead of eating huge steaks or hamburgers, which will cause you to have a heart bypass. So they then targeted, with that unknown data, a campaign at the super rich, saying, right, here's a new credit card that will help you live longer because you get a special discount shopping in the most famous, super expensive organic health food store. And it was a very, very successful campaign. They reduced their IT costs by 30%, increased their productivity by 30%, and had a net incremental revenue in terms of daily expenditure of $26 million, which doubled the following year. So they got competitive edge against their rival credit cards. They served their clients better because they had an holistic view of how the super high rich wanted to live. Longer, healthier.
They gave this insight just from analyzing where these people,
The behavioral expenditure trends, absolutely, which before was taking them weeks and months, but in the meantime, every credit card company is trying to evaluate how are their clients spending the money, how can they target new campaigns, laser marketing, and they had to change the methodology of data access, data analytics, to come up with this new very successful campaign. So people are living longer and spending more money, everyone's happy. Can't be bad. Any more questions before you have dinner on the lovely Bosporus? No? Well, I'd like, oh, please. Yeah.
What do you think about the GDPR comes to online and IT?
Yeah, I think any regulation is good for companies in the data world because data then becomes king and organizations need to be compliant in their use of data. So I see GDPR, I see banking regulation from a commercial software perspective as wonderful. I mean, if you're a banker, you might view it completely different. Compliance becomes a nightmare. But regulation makes data king, and the more enterprise-grade security built into that data stack, and that's why cloud providers are building a host of new security levels into their cloud provisioning. Infrastructure players such as ourselves, again, building enterprise role-based security. So security is key in a compliance regulatory GDPR-driven world. But as a vendor, it's great. As an end user, maybe less so.
Can you compare the data stack or the workflow with the enterprise services about the ESP?
Sorry?
Can you compare the data stack with the ESP and enterprise services about are they related or not? Or can you compare any service bus and the data stack?
I didn't understand. Sorry. Third time lucky.
Okay, for the enterprise services, we have the enterprise services bus, so we can communicate various programs through the enterprise services bus. Can you compare the data stack with that kind of approach to enterprise services? Still blank?
Yeah, still blank. Do you have? Sorry. Do you have an answer to that or not? Yeah.
I think it's talking about enterprise service bus. It's about a data highway.
Yes.
For multiple components of enterprise to communicate.
To communicate, yeah.
So I think it's about comparing that with the data set.
Yeah.
Like a data
He got it. Okay. It sounds like not a dissimilar methodology, aiming for the end goal. But I don't know the precise answer to your question, I'm afraid.
So I was a little late, so I almost missed most of the talk. But one of the most important problems of data solutions in general is thinking of it as a workflow to sort things out from the office. Is that the data sources cannot communicate with each other well, right? So they don't talk to each other. So I was wondering if the solution, whether you have any thoughts on that, particularly legacy systems, we don't have that communication in place.
Yeah, so I mean the key thing in this Swiss neutral data preparation world is the connectivity. It has to plug in to a multitude of legacy environments, and also by the same token feed up to a multitude of legacy front-end dashboards. But at the back end, new data eras are emerging. Cloud provisioning is emerging, obviously, very rapidly. At the front end, there are new front-end analytical tools and graphing capabilities, etc. So it's all about how you prepare, ingest, cleanse, feed that data up, ETL it, and that's where you get the blood flow, the traffic jam scenario that I mentioned. You need to cleanse the system, the flow of data, and that's the crux of the problem. Any more for any more? No? Well, I'm going for some baklava now then. So thank you all for your time. Have a wonderful evening.